has asked for a motion to approve 2 sets of minutes from our regular meeting and our additional meeting in July.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, or any concerns, discussion on those minutes? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any changes to the agenda, Randy?
Nope, as written.
Okay, I need approval of the agenda.
Approved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Next, we have public comments. We did receive a handful of comments, email. I have 2 individuals here tonight that would like to speak to us. I think you both have been here before. You're allotted 3 minutes. Ted, you going to time us this evening? Thank you. So I have Eric Pierce first. Yes. Were you guys kind of doing rock, paper, scissors back there?
I lost. Is this mic on?
Yep.
Yes.
Good. Hi, my name is Eric. I'm a resident. I've got kids in the school district. And I consider myself a fairly reasonable person, but the referendums kind of concern me. Some of the things that I had seen in the previous meeting, I watched it online, and which I want to thank you all for making those available online. I think that's wonderful to do that so people can keep up on events when they're not able to attend in person. So the things that concern me was the kind of that $10 million, the $2 million every year referendum thing that you guys were talking about. The overall building, the new building referendum that you were talking about, and that's a lot of money, but you know, we have to keep the school districts strong. We have to keep them, you know, meeting the needs and demands of the community. So I would support that. I think that's reasonable. But the $2 million every year, it seemed like there was a little bit of a gray area when it came to what exactly is that money going to be used for. At least that was my perception. And I know you all had a list of items that this is what are things that could be in that budget, but also some of those things were also part of our regular budget. And first off, I think you've heard me speak. I'm absolutely against the partisan partnerships, and I consider to some degree some of them fairly radical in some of the content they have. And it may be not that that's what they're teaching the kid, you know, the content they're providing to you all, but I'm sorry if you got a group that's providing radical content on their YouTube channel, on their website, I just don't trust that they're not going to insert in some sort of radical ideology to our children. I think our schools should be partisan free, right? I don't really want to see politics of any side brought into our schools. I'd like it just to be education and teaching our kids. It's there. But I'm telling you, and I think, who was it before, Jack made a point in the last meeting that if you have it, and I've been working in government for a long time, if you have that money available, you're gonna find some way to spend it. Some project is gonna come up and you're gonna spend that money. So I wouldn't support that without very clearly defining what's gonna be in that referendum, especially with the economy, what's happening right now. If you want to spend money on something particular, I think we're reasonable. You come to us with a referendum if you want to exceed those caps. Say, here's what we want to spend the money on specifically, and ask us about it, and then I think the community will be receptive to it, but not just a blank extra $2 million a year check without really any specifics. So I thank you very much that's my time.
Thank you, Eric.
Let me guess who's next.
And we have Greg. Thank you, Greg.
Hi, my name is Greg Gens. I have 2 daughters in the district. Kind of similar thoughts that Eric had. I'm here to speak about the referendums, the $175 million construction referendum. I totally support it. I want to keep our schools great, strong. I do support that. Similarly, the $2 million over 5 years, I know that there's some new options coming today. I wasn't able to find those on the board book to see what those options were. But having any kind of expenditure like that doesn't have specificity to it, I would be opposed to. In addition, you know, we did have the budgetary options list, which is 4 pages of all sorts of stuff that's going to be in the budget. Eric mentioned it. Some of those options, and not necessarily that $2 million will be exactly it, does go to some partisan partnerships like a national equity project, some origins developmental design that currently is our main SEL learning, social emotional learning. Thank you. Partnership that has some pretty divisive content that we've talked with Randy and Tim about, and they confirmed that was the case. Some of the stuff that's on their website and such. I find it very difficult to support additional spending when we have those partnerships in our schools and are engaged in them. In this optional budget, there's $132,000 on those partnerships and similar partnerships. There's $276,000 on SEL coaches, and that's just 1 year. That's every year, $276,000. The other thing is the $550,000 in compensation that would be in the operational. I completely support having compensation that's competitive. My kids' teachers have been great, but I don't in an operational. We all have to make choices right now, especially with the budget issues that were going on. I think the school does too. That needs to be in their main budget without an additional spending on our property taxes, in my view. The second thing that I would like to throw out there real quick is we're going to be talking about some policy issues today. Specifically, what I would like to talk about is the policy about national anthem, Pledge of Allegiance, and flag displays. Sadly, throughout our country, and we've had some of it come here, that our flagpoles have become ideological battlegrounds. And again, the partisan stuff, I just don't think that it needs to be in our schools at all. And my teachers have done a great job. My kids' teachers. I love them to death. They've been great. There have been, other people that have tried and wanted to put stuff up the flagpole in many different, villages, towns, states, what have you. And I would ask, just protect our flagpoles from becoming that ideological battleground. It doesn't need to be done. There's alternate places like the mental health flag we talked about putting up in guidance and stuff within the school. There's alternate places to do that. And I would ask that there be one word added to that policy. Simply the very first word of it saying only. Only the United States flag and Wisconsin flag will be flown. It's that simple. So I appreciate you listening to my suggestions and your time.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you both for speaking this evening. I appreciate your comments. Moving on, I don't think we have any teachers, but are there any board members that have attended any meetings or trainings in the last month that they would like to share at this time? If not, we will move on to our committee report, starting with Curriculum Committee.
Okay, so we met a couple weeks ago, and within our agenda, we talked about addressing what our process is going to be to address the recommendations from the DEI audit, and that we are going to break that down into, for lack of a better term, chunks over the next few meetings, and we'll start that. Tim and Amy will present that to our curriculum committee meeting at our next meeting. And then we also discussed curriculum review meetings that we will reinstitute. This was something that my understanding is something that the district did or the board did a few years back, and we're going to reinstate those starting in November. But we have one thing that we need a motion for, and that is the draft of our testing schedule for the school year. And I don't know if Tim or Amy, if you want to talk to us or let us know about some of the changes that are happening on that testing schedule. I think the main one is just the pre-ACT.
I think Rebecca's going to pull it up so you can see
Okay,
it. and
thanks,
just-
Rebecca.
Yeah, so this is something we do on an annual basis. This is our main testing schedule, and once this is approved, this gets communicated out to families and our staff. A lot of this is the same from year to year. However, as Katie noted, this includes not only our locally selected assessments, it also includes the state assessment system. And the most significant change this year is that for the 9th and 10th grade aspects of the state assessment system, the Aspire, which is an ACT product, is going to be replaced by the pre-ACT, which is also an ACT product. That's the overall conceptual approach of the state assessment system at high school. It's also a statutory requirement in the law. Aspire is being retired by ACT. That has been a technology-based assessment. The pre-ACT is very similar to the paper and pencil ACT. It's something that students would take on a bubble form. It's a little shorter than the main ACT that juniors take.
Tim, going back to the first, are the Fontes and Pinell, are those like the reading records?
Yes, those are what we'd call a running record.
The running
That's
records,
where,
yeah.
if I get a little long on my rope, I'm going to ask Amy to help me out here. A running record is where a teacher reads a book that's at a predetermined level of difficulty. And I should say the teacher presents it to the child reads the book. The child's ability to read the book successfully is evidence of their reading level. An experienced teacher listening carefully to how the child is reading the book also can use the running record as a diagnostic tool, not only to determine the child's reading level, but also to better understand the strengths of the child's strategies in reading and potentially guide further instruction for the student.
Is it correct that some of these were done before school started in previous years? Is that true?
I think I'm going to ask Amy to fill in the details on that.
Because I just wondered if staff had the opportunity, because I know that they are very, very time-consuming and difficult when you have the whole classroom there.
Yeah, pre-pandemic, we did offer a couple of weeks in August where
Yeah.
teachers could elect to come in and invite families to come in, and they would administer the running record then and kind of meet the child. And then in exchange for that, they would not report for the teacher work day in January, not the staff development day, but the work day. And then we paused that for obvious reasons during the pandemic, but we did offer that as an option for teachers again this summer.
Oh, thank you, thank you. I know that that was important to many staff members to have that time.
So we are, if there aren't any other questions, we're just looking for a motion to approve this assessment schedule for the 22-23 school year.
Motion to approve.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Katie.
Motion. Thank you.
The DEI committee.
Nothing to vote on here, just update. We nearly completed the review of the recommendations from the initial DEI group. They have 3 recommendations to complete yet. And then we focused on the leadership conference that we were talking about conceptually, and the focus that we agreed upon was for the outcome being creating a greater sense of belonging in our school. And looking to focus on both club membership and unaffiliated members. And if there were going to be 1 or 2 prominent speakers, we would like to have a business person who has been involved with an inclusive culture at their point of business, ensure that if that's where the planners go. The plan is to give these, the goals to our guidance department at the high school and have them work with students to plan the day. And that's pretty much what we have.
Yeah, I think just to follow up on that, I know Tim and I and Chris Mand and Brian Borowski are going to be meeting here in the next few days to kind of talk through that whole concept that came out of the DEI committee. The whole idea, as Mark said, is to look at something that kind of focuses on kind of a collective vision of how do you create a positive and welcoming school climate, and having collective voice from students to help kind of bring that forward. Once we kind of flush some of those pieces out, we'll bring that back through the committee and then through the board so you can understand what that is. But shooting for some time, hopefully, to do it in this first semester of the school year to try to move some of those pieces forward. So more to come.
Thank you. Co-Curricular Committee?
Yeah, we met on August 1st, and we had a full committee there. Aaron was, this is sort of a routine for Aaron to report back to all of us on participation reports, Booster Club financials, ticket sales from the spring. So all of that is located in Board Book, and there was no action items taken on this one at all, and we'll be following up with another meeting here shortly, probably the next couple of weeks. So Aaron's here if there's any questions from those minutes, but there was no action items this week.
A lot of documents that Aaron put together, so thank you for pulling all that data together, and you do it on an annual basis for us, Aaron. But if there are any questions on any of the things that you saw in Board Book, I wasn't able to be at the co-curricular meeting, but I understand you did a nice job presenting it for about an hour of the meeting. Was really all based on the information that you're seeing in the packet this evening.
Mark?
Yeah, I guess I just had a couple of questions. One, in going through some of the documents, it looked like there may be 5 clubs that had somewhere between $1,000 to $3,000 in gifts. So do those come to you for approval to make sure the gifts fall in line with the WIAA regulations, or is that just kind of a nebulous number and nobody knows what it's for?
Are you on the revenue side or on the expenses?
Expense side.
So those gifts would be coaches' gifts. So as long as there's no WIA regulations there, as long as they fall within our board policy about, found in the number escapes me right now, but it's the PTO Booster Club guidelines. So that, those and the senior gifts. And there's no regulations, or very few regulations, I should say. WIA does have a handful of ones. But that has to do more with pay to play than it does just a straight up senior gift at the end of the year and coach's gift at the end of the year.
Yep.
Okay, and then, yeah, there's a lot of money there that's being generated and being spent, and I guess I was a little concerned when, I mean, okay, I know it's not an itemized expense revenue sheet per, but there is a category called other, which that other varied between 10,000, 20,000, 17,000, 11,000, and that's a lot of money to have just sort of a generic other for an expense from my perspective. And so is there a more itemized accounting that you receive from these clubs, or is that kind of the norm we're working under?
This is the norm that we're working under. Remember back in 17, 18, we changed to this form. What we used to do is get kind of a tally sheet or a detailed list of everything they purchased. And that's 16, 17, 17, 18 school year. At that time, the co-curricular committee decided they didn't want that level. They didn't want it that way. They preferred this more of a global snapshot. So that's when we switched over to this current reporting form. So we've had this
the form that it's currently in was reviewed and approved, I would say that was 17, 18, maybe 18, right in that time frame.
18, 19.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can add a little bit to that, Aaron. We've seen those reports come in different formats over time. And one of the things that we spent some time with the Co-Curricular Committee on, and it was probably around 17, 18, or 18, 19, probably about that time frame, as I think you're correct, Aaron, of what information do you want us to gather? And so the new form that you're seeing, the one that's in Board Book, was the one that was kind of outlined by the committee and was approved by the committee for what we should be collecting. Because I think we had a more detailed kind of version of that, and I think that at that point, the committee felt that they wanted a higher level view of kind of what was happening. So that's where that really came from. One of the things that I've also done this year is I've asked Steve to kind of check in with some of our colleagues in other districts to see kind of what kind of reports they get from booster clubs. We really didn't get any guidance with regards to that because I don't think there is a lot of interaction at that level. I think we're asking some questions that some other places are not diving into and asking. So trying to find kind of what's the model process for monitoring these, I think we're kind of creating it as we go. But the document that Aaron is talking about is accurate, that was what was requested and changed from the co-curricular's perspective.
Yeah, my understanding with this as well, Mark, is that the booster clubs pretty much run on their own. There are a few that the school helps out, and I've had discussions with Steve and stuff like that, and the district's pretty comfortable with where that school has their hands in on a little bit to help them out. But the other ones are sort of out on their own anyway, so they are there. We have nothing would fall back on us at that point. But what we need to do is start collecting when things are spent from those booster clubs as a district to make sure that, because as soon as it goes from booster club to the school equipment trip, it becomes school dollars that we need to track.
Well, and the concern I have is that the kid doesn't have a choice, or families doesn't have a choice. If they're in a sport, they join the booster club. That's an expectation. And if our students are being expected, or their families, to kick in X amount of money, at least for the 9-12 portion, I think there should be a clear accounting, revenues, expenses, that balances out at the end of the year. And I'm not aware of any accounting process out there that advocates for a 4-figure miscellaneous kind of or general, unidentified specificity. And it's, to me, it protects the club and it protects our kids. And I've been concerned about this when I was on the committee. Maybe that's pre-16, 17. It just, I'm not accusing anyone of doing anything wrong. I'm just saying that I feel without clarity, families who are required to kick in because they want to participate in our sports have no say. And the clubs that are doing it, unless there's a defined accounting system, it puts them in a difficult position as well in terms of making sure that everything's being done the right way for them, so that nothing blows up in their face. I just saw in the paper about 5 weeks ago, I believe it was a soccer club in Madison that someone embezzled $35,000.
And I
And it
agree with
concerns
you.
me. I mean, I'm not saying it's happening here, but without accounting, the door is open for that to happen some days. And so I just feel uncomfortable with those nebulous numbers. And I know we have an issue with, a lot of clubs are K-12. Well, maybe there should be separation, K-9 or K-8 and 9-12, because 9-12 are the ones I'm concerned about. Those are our students who are being forced to hand over the money to join the club. They don't have a say in it. And for that part, I'd like to see greater accounting.
And I think that's a good point that you make, that, you know, some of these sports, when I'm looking at them, or these clubs, there may be significant dollars because they're supporting K through
Sure.
12, you know, so they might look like, wow, that's a lot of money, you
Yep.
know, where you're, it's a comparing apples to oranges, you
Yep.
know, with some of them, so yeah.
And are they all, you mentioned that they're all required, they're not, I don't think they're all required for all clubs to be part of that. I mean, I don't think we have to be a touchdown club member to be in football. So there's probably different aspects of the sport that you have to pay for, but I don't think, maybe it is for other ones you have to be, I'm not really even sure on that.
No, I don't think you are. I mean, I've talked to people over the last few years who felt like they had to.
Sure.
But from what discussions with Aaron and Randy, you know, they know that they don't have to. I mean, they're not being told they don't have to. It sounds like, but yeah, the parents do feel like, well, I have no choice, but they really do. And you know, I think as a board, if we found out that, you know, people weren't getting opportunities because they weren't part of the board or booster club, that would be our issue.
Yeah.
And I know
But
Eric-
I agree with you. I don't like seeing obscure, you know, I want to see itemized, but again, we can't apparently do some of this stuff with booster clubs that are not out of our control, really. Right?
Now, I think there's going to be some continued conversations around the whole booster club piece, particularly as we kind of continue some of our other dialogues that are going to be forthcoming. So I think as we start to look at it, I think it'll be, I think part of what you're discussing tonight and some of the financial reportings and kind of how that lays into some of the other things that we're looking into. I think this will bring back a conversation that's going to get at some of the things that you're looking at. I mean, I think there's some certainly things that we can do. It's really kind of a matter of what we've been choosing to do, and I think part of some of the direction that Aaron's been given, and that was a piece that I think when we kind of tried to narrow the focus down was that there was a lot of discussion around what information do we want, and I think the question that I asked was, well, let's give some definition so that Aaron knows what to ask for, because all of these clubs are extremely different, and they operate differently, they're differently structured, some are much smaller in dollars and some are much larger. As you pointed out, some do span the entire youth program and others don't. So some of those pieces are things that we've discussed recently, and we'll be coming back with some discussion items around that.
All right, any other co-curricular? Thank you, Aaron.
Thanks, Aaron.
Brian.
Thanks, Aaron.
The last committee meeting is policy committee.
Policy, we met as one of our directives is, one of our goals is to review the policy guide. We're continuing that work, and we're on the 300 series now. And as we all know, we're using the WASB as a guideline in doing that review process. So Rebecca and Randy have the PRG, the policy resource guide, that really is helping us to do that. And there's a portion here that we are looking to have the board a motion to approve these. And some of these, I don't know if you want any specific ones to like talk about, to go over, or if you wanted to address them. Some we're looking to repeal the actual policy, and really it sounds like it's, why would we repeal the policy? And really there's nothing in a lot of those where they're being repealed. Those specific topics are dealt with in other policies. Or the policy itself really doesn't have a lot of, what's the right word? Not a lot of teeth to it. Doesn't have anything that you could really, any action that you hold. So, if you wanted to add anything more to that. Right?
Yeah, I think that's a good synopsis. The document that you see in board book, the one that looks like the chart, that's actually the document that we get from the School Board Association as they've gone through and reviewed them. We then go through and we, as kind of just to review what our process is, Rebecca and I go through it administratively. We brought Tim and Amy into this process, and since this is instruction, Ted met with us to kind of go through these pieces, and then they were reviewed for a last time before they came here by the policy committee. And I think really what you're looking at here is trying to determine kind of what do you want in your policy book. And from the WASB's perspective, they're looking at it and saying, is it a policy that you need? And if it is, is it something that's going to have, and I like your words there, Ted, does it have teeth to it, or is it just kind of language that is there to be present? And I think when you go back, and some of these policies are relatively old. They've been around for a while, and I think some of the work around board policies has evolved over time as well. So things like instructional goals. We all value instructional goals. I mean, that's not saying that shouldn't be something that we emulate. But in this case, we're looking to repeal it because when you start to really look through what that policy says, it really just talks about what we kind of expect from a teacher. And those are found in other places. So the same thing with like academic freedom. I mean, that's really kind of a construct that really lives much more at a college level than at a K-12 level. And that's really what the WASB was kind of pointing out here is you have this piece here, but it really kind of falls within kind of a different construct of where it resides. And then things like the academic honesty piece, having that
Before we go back,
yes,
so
please.
On that one, it says, make sure staff understand why removed.
Right.
I think that's important, but also there is, and I didn't go pick up the number, but
Yeah.
we do have a policy with regard to selection of materials and curriculum
Right.
that very much addresses teacher autonomy in the selection process.
Right.
And so I think that's a piece that they should be made aware of as well,
Correct.
that is there.
Yeah, and I guess the piece that just to kind of, and you bring up a really good point here, Mark, we're taking just a part of the 300 series. So as Barry Forbes, the attorney at the WASB who's working with us on this, as he completes 10, 15 policies, he's sharing them with us as opposed to waiting till he's done with the entire 300 series. I actually like that because it allows us to keep moving through at a little bit more manageable pace. So you're going to see some of those pieces. And I think you're going to, one of the things that Rebecca and I've seen and Ted has seen as we've gone through these in the other versions is some of the policies we have are very succinct, where they'll have 4 policies all by themselves, and some of the modern policy language kind of rolls them all into one. So I think you're going to find some of the language in other places as well. So I think that's a great point. But just to give you kind of those examples, the instructional goals, the academic freedom, and then academic honesty is a policy. That's a piece that's found within our student handbooks. It's relatively specific. So that's a piece that as we've kind of looked at that one, it's to repeal it, not because we don't believe in it, but because it's really found somewhere else. And as we see nuances that come up with academic honesty, we can more rapidly change them within a handbook setting as opposed to a board policy. So those are just a few examples, but if I guess I'd open it up for any questions that anyone has with regards to kind of what is in front of you, and if you want me to walk through the rest of them, I'm happy to.
No, I think that was a good explanation of it.
And I
My
think,
questions.
I think in addition, you'll see there's a definite formatting difference with the newer ones, and we'll have the old ones in there. And I think we talked about does that make sense to leave it that way? And I don't think we've landed on anything totally yet, but in a way it does. It gives a little bit of a legacy or history of, oh, well, this is where this one originated.
Right, exactly. I mean, the other one I just want to comment on, because there was a public comment on it tonight, there is a policy in there which I realized there was one on the national anthem. I just didn't realize it also tied in the flag piece to it. So we've had kind of this separate item that we've had for discussion at the committee level around a flag policy. There was actually a direction in here with regards to, that's what Greg was speaking about in public comments, and our recommendation was just to keep that policy in place. And then I think at some point as we kind of move forward here to review it, if there's anything we want to revise with that when we have additional dialogue around the other policy draft language that we have. But for right now, I think our intent would be to keep it. So the committee's recommendation right now is to do the policies up through 323.3. Is that correct, Rebecca?
That's correct.
Yep. And that's what our recommendation is this evening. So if you're comfortable with those, you could make them all in one motion, and then we can move forward. or we'll be happy to answer any questions or pull any out specifically that you'd like to discuss.
Make a motion to approve all.
Second.
Any other discussion on the policies presented? All in favor of passing that through, say aye.
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 Opposed, say no. Thank you.
Right, awesome. Just as a kind of a side note, you will continue to see policy continuing to come forward. Policy committee, I think, is meeting almost every month here. And so as these policies start flowing through, we'll continue to move them in front of the board. So our hope is that ideally this year, if we could move through the 300 and 400 series by the end of the school year, I think that'd be a huge accomplishment.
Great. Okay, moving on to administrative reports and recommendations. Randy, are you?
Sure, I'll talk a little bit, then I'm going to turn it over to Steve, and Steve is on the Zoom meeting. This is really bringing back the draft resolutions for the fall 2022 referendum. Steve Alley and I heard the feedback that was provided at our last meeting, and what we wanted to do, and I think we've talked to some of you kind of individually just to bounce a few ideas off. We're bringing back some additional items here this evening and some additional ideas that we want to propose to you for how we can really put together these draft resolutions. Just a reminder, we're not asking for any action here tonight. We have a special meeting, I believe, on the 22nd of August. At that point, we do need to bring forth the resolutions that you will vote on. So your feedback tonight will then yield us writing up the actual resolutions. We'll be working with our attorneys to make sure that that's done in the proper way, so that then you have those pieces in front of you to vote on the 22nd. Once those are voted on, those become then the actual questions that end up on our ballot and things that we have to then publicly notice in the newspaper and in other respects. But with that, I want to turn it over to Steve, let him walk through some of the work that primarily he and Allie have done over the last number of weeks, and kind of walk through what those options are for you.
Okay, thank you, Randy. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Loud and
Yes.
clear.
Okay, good, thank you. So in this agenda item, we did start with putting back in the draft resolution for the capital question of $175 million. We did mention at the last special board meeting on this topic that any board members could reach out to Randy or myself if you had any thoughts or suggestions regarding the $175 million draft resolution. I don't believe Randy or I did hear any feedback from the school board members. So that resolution that we brought back into the board packet for tonight does look the same as what you saw 2 weeks ago. So before we jump into the operational questions and some of the alternatives we brought tonight, I just wanted to confirm to see if any board members had the chance to think about the $175 million capital question, and to hear if you had any thoughts or feedback regarding that topic before we jump into the operational referendum question.
Any questions?
I don't think so, Steve. You can continue.
Okay, thanks, Randy. So after the last board meeting, when we talked as well about the operational referendum question, I had an opportunity to speak with Jack Heineman, the board treasurer, after the meeting, and Jack prompted my thinking on bringing forward some additional options for consideration tonight. And one of the things that Jack mentioned is that we have that existing non-recurring operational referendum that the public approved in the fall of 2020 that goes through 2025. The operational referendum question draft that you saw at the last special board meeting also attempted to solve the issue of that referendum question expiring in 2025. So what Jack said to me is, what if you built these referendums, these operational referendum questions, so that they were on some consistent cycle? So Allie and I went back and took a look at that, and realized that a 3-year operational referendum question could line up very nicely on a cycle that would go with the 2020 referendum that expires in 2025. So we took a look at a couple of 3-year options as well as the 5-year option that we presented the last time. In talking to another board member, we also heard some feedback about being more specific in the operational referendum question. So the draft question that you saw 2 weeks ago was very open as far as the language that's set for operational and maintenance purposes. So one of the board members suggested that we be more specific and actually address the items that were asked about in the community survey. So if Rebecca wouldn't mind opening up the last attachment for a moment. And if you wouldn't mind going to the end first, Rebecca, the very end of this document. If everybody can see that the wording alternative ending for just a moment, if we could just focus on that part first. Thank you. That language is language that could replace the statements in any of the 4 of the questions where it says, for purposes consisting of operational and maintenance expenses. So you could swap out that more general language with the alternative language that's included on the screen right now that would match the questions that we put in the community survey. So just wanted to share with you that that language could go with any of the 4, and we didn't really want to have 8 versions of this for you to look at tonight. So we wanted just to start with asking for feedback from the board on the language that's listed right there, which is more specific to the type of questions we asked during the community survey. And do you prefer that, or do you prefer the more general language that is referenced in each of the questions that basically refers to operational and maintenance expenses? So we were hoping to first get your feedback on that, and then we could talk about the 4 different options that we presented. So Randy, would you mind taking it from there on that one?
Yeah, that sounds great. Does everybody understand what Steve is talking about there? If you take a look at just even what Rebecca has up on the option 4, the last sentence there says, for non-recurring purposes consisting of an operational and maintenance expenses. An alternative language we could put there that just has more specificity to it would be that alternative ending stating consisting of expenses related to attracting and retaining staff, operating and maintaining any additional school facilities, and maintaining current programs and services. So that's just a little bit more specific. It lines up with some of the language, as Steve said, that we'd used in our survey. Either one is fine. One just adds more specificity, and that was some of the feedback we received as we were interacting with a few of you over the last few weeks. So looking for a little feedback on, is there...
I like this, yeah, I like the alternative. I mean, we've heard it from the public, we've heard it from a couple board members too, on being more specific. And I think it reads well. I like it. I support that.
I support more specificity as well.
Okay. Are you comfortable with that language in the alternative ending? Is there anything that you would, I mean, if there are things that you have feedback for the language there, this is still something we could take back and make sure that we can.
And that's how it read, consisting of expenses related to attracting and retaining staff on the
survey.
On the survey, that's the
Is
language.
that correct, Steve? That was the exact language from the survey with regards to attracting and retaining staff?
The only thing that was different, Randy, is in the community survey, we used the term to attract and retain a high-quality staff.
Can't use
And
that.
our bond attorney said that words that are subjective, like high quality, can't be included in a referendum
Okay.
question.
Sure.
So it's slightly different
Okay.
than what we had in the community service with community survey, but through the lens of an attorney looking at what's allowed in Wisconsin state ballot language.
Right.
Yeah, I support the more descriptive, it's taking into account what we're actually surveying for that.
Yep.
I like that.
Okay.
So is there any concern with the word current programs? If we started anything new during that time that we couldn't use this money for?
So I would say yes, but this language was designed to match the community survey as best as we could. We would need to maybe change that, Brian, if there was an interest in maybe adding something else to it. Because the third question we asked on the community survey was referencing both the 2020 operational referendum that expired and the ESSER federal funding that expires, that we were needing to replace those funds to maintain existing programs. So this is really closely aligned, and basically we gave the community survey the results to the bond attorney and asked her to match it as close as possible. And that's what she did. We would probably have to ask her to add that in, what you just referenced.
Yep. I think that's a good suggestion, Brian, is I think as we start to look at some of our different programs, if there are things that we want to expand on or add to it, it makes sense to put that there. At least gives you flexibility. All of these things, as I've explained to everybody, the language here doesn't approve any program, doesn't approve any line item. It just gives us the authority to utilize the funds for that purpose, and then all of those items then have to be approved through the board before we move forward. So I like that addition.
But if in general, if the board prefers that alternative language, and we can ask about the question you posed, Brian, that would replace in any of the four above where it says consisting of operational and maintenance expenses, you would just swap that in for any of those four.
Yeah. I think we have
And
consensus.
So if the board prefers that, just look at the four above with the idea of swapping in that language at the bottom.
I think we have consensus to use the alternative ending and then to look at the language as Brian proposed.
Okay,
Is that accurate?
so then if Rebecca would mind going back to
Well-
the first page of that.
I would suggest you take the question mark out at the end of it, though.
Yes. Yes.
Good suggestion, Mark.
Thank you.
You still have it, Mark.
It was low hanging fruit.
So then option one, the first one, the recurring 10 million, is the same draft language that you saw 2 weeks ago. I do think it's important to just note, I did mention this 2 weeks ago, this question attempts to also solve the issue of the 2020 operational referendum expiring in 2025. So just keep that in mind when you look at the question for option one. Option two changes it from a recurring question, which in state of Wisconsin school finance means permanent. Non-recurring means you would have to ask the public again once the term of that referendum expires. So the second option is the same $10 million option, but non-recurring. So it ends after the end of that 5-year period of time. And then options 3 and 4 are the shorter time frames. So option 3 is the 3-year question instead of a 5-year question. Option 4 is a 3-year question as well instead of a 5-year. The difference between 3 and 4 is 3 is recurring, and again, so that's a permanent change to the revenue limit formula. Option 4 is non-recurring, meaning the board would have to ask the question to the public again. The nice part about option 4 is that it does line up in the years with the other question that expires in 2025. The other nice thing about going 3 years instead of 5 is that it only puts us in 2 state budget cycles, not 3. And it's a more defined period of time and would allow the board to reassess in a shorter time frame. So there definitely are some advantages to looking at a shorter, smaller dollar amount. And just for a minute to talk about the dollar amounts, the reason why this one's structured a little differently, which is 1 million, then 2 million, then 3 million. The 3 million is structured in the third year, the additional 3 million, because that's the year that our ESSER 3 funding drops off. The school board has already made the decision to spread out our federal funds over as many fiscal years as we can. So our largest source of federal funding, the ESSER 3, we decided to spread that out over 22-23 and 23-24. But then that funding is no longer there for 24-25. So we phased this in a manner designed to allow our district to utilize the federal funding that we're receiving from ESSER 3, and realizing that in the third year of this question, the ESSER 3 funds would no longer remain because we're planning on using them over the next 2 years. We also talked about whether it's a 3-year or a 5-year. We don't know what the next state budget is going to bring for school finance. This question gives the board the authority to exceed the revenue limit, and that decision has to be made every year in October. This is asking the public for the authority to do that, and it's asking the public to approve this question over a 3-year period of time, where as of right now, we do not know what that state budget will look like for the second and third year. So this is just a different look at the operational referendum question that you saw last week or 2 weeks ago, with a recurring and a non-recurring version of both of them, and a shorter version being 3 years versus the 5 years. And administratively, we're trying to come up with an option that we think would be best supported by the school board and ultimately the community. So we're very interested in turning this dialogue over to the board members to really ask you what your thoughts are. Do you have a preference for any of these? Does one of these resonate with you? Or do you think that we need to keep working on other options? And Randy, do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, I just want to ask, I want to clarify one piece. So on both options 3 and 4, this is a 3-year picture. And then what it would require then is you go back to referendum in the probably fall of 24. I think that'll be a piece we have to communicate out to the community, because at that point we will have opened up the new elementary school. We'll be just in the midst of construction of the middle school. So there's potential you'll be back at referendum in the fall of 24. But at least what this does is it gives you kind of that 3-year piece to see kind of what's going to happen with that economy. It's also going to give you a picture of kind of how did that construction of the first school go. And as Steve said, which I think there's a great deal of merit, it's only looking at 2 biennial budgets versus 3. So, I mean, I think that there's some merit to take a look at some of the alternative options we've given here. But it does require you to then communicate that you will come back in fall of 24. That is also the general election. That's the presidential election, so that's a big turnout election. So if you're going to be going to referendum, that's not a bad one to go to. With that, I guess we'd open it up for any questions and dialogue. And what we're looking for here tonight is trying to see if we can have at least some level of consensus of what we need to bring back for our next meeting on the 22nd.
Steve, you may have covered this while I was reading and you were talking. But in option 4, it says 6 million and 1 million and 3 million and 6 million over that time period is 10.
1, 2, and 3.
What's that?
We're
1
missing.
million, 2 million.
Yeah, it's supposed to be 1 million, then 2 million, then 3 million.
I was gonna say, it reads
Yeah.
different than option 3, which then says, for a total of, so. If I was the public, I would have been, well.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Brian. The non-recurring, the recurring, what you're actually seeing, I should have mentioned this before, our bond attorney thought it would be easier to see the actual ballot language. She thought that would be the easiest way to kind of look through these 4 options. And the non-recurring questions are written a little differently than the recurring ones. The recurring ones are written with, it starts with 1, and then the 1 continues. So then an additional 2 in the second year totals 3, and then an additional 3 in the third year totals 6. The non-recurring, because they go away, are written as you can do 1 million the first time. The next year would be an additional 2, so it goes into the revenue limit formula is 3, and then it goes in the last year is 6. But it really is an extra 1 million in the first year, an extra 2 million in the second year, and an extra 3 million in the third year.
Thank you.
So thanks for asking that.
Concerns?
I guess I like the idea of it expiring about the same time as the other one, and then the current board at that time making a decision on where you go from there. It's easier to swallow, I think, for the public.
So you like option 4?
4, yeah.
I would agree with you, Brian. I think it's good to have the specificity in the alternative ending language. And then I also think it's good that it is consistent with the last referendum that we did in terms of the time frame. And then also they work together nicely, and it gives us a chance, or the board a chance to, the district a chance to revisit it again. And like you said, it's easier to swallow.
Well, I think we're gonna continue to need more money. But if we can make it palatable so that people feel like, okay, 6 million, and then we're really gonna expect them to give us another 6, keep coming back, and we're expecting that to happen. So if this is palatable for everybody, I'm supportive of it.
In any of them, I'm for the non-recurring, and definitely option 4. It is nice that it coincides with when the other one's ending. I'm still with the 6 million, I struggle with that number. But at least we're able to go back and continue to ask the public in a much shorter time frame. I'm for that.
Well, the other thing that appeals to me from a fiscal perspective and also, I think, coincides with our community is that state budgeting may change. So, this runs out in 3 years. I don't know if it's a fait accompli, that we definitely would go to referendum again if the state budget looks different. So I think this gives us a chance to look at that fiscal environment that we're going to be dealing with. And I do think we would need to at least clarify that we may need to go to referendum again, but not that we definitely will be. I think those are 2 different messages. And because if the budget is reflective more of the previous 4 years, we won't have to. At least I don't think we would have to. So,
That's fair enough.
Yeah, my heart says we should always do recurring because expenses don't go away. Once you have expenses on the table in a growing district like ours, they're always gonna be there. So, you know, my heart says we should always be using a recurring one. I can live with the non-recurring. I like that it doesn't overlap a non-recurring we just had. I think 1 and 2 make that hard to explain, that we're not really asking for 10 million because we're excusing money that between the ESSER money and the other referendum. I think that 1 and 2 are hard to explain, that it really isn't 10 million, it's much less than that. You know, I do think we need to make sure the public understands that this money is being used for the total operation, which are recurring expenses that aren't gonna go away. So, you know, I don't want to deceive them to think that this is for expenses that, you know, are in any other manner than ones that we are using to operate our building, and they're not really going away at the end of this time period. And I agree, you know, our state budget may radically change, we can only hope. So I can live with 4, knowing that at that time period, we just have to regroup.
So I think, Steve, we have kind of a consensus to look at the alternative ending that we discussed prior, plus option 4 under this area. Does that seem correct? Okay. So that's generally what we're going to then bring back at the meeting on the 22nd. Steve, do you have anything? I'd like to bring up one of the items just to kind of show the board and the community some of the other referendums that are going in November. Do you have anything else to add before we pull that up?
What I would just share, Randy, is we don't have to bring this up, Rebecca, but for board members who would want to view this later, in board book, if you remember, Eric Cass came to our July board meeting and presented a financial plan that basically worked with the concept of the draft resolutions that you had seen previously. We did ask him to update that so you could see what a draft financial plan would look like with the options 3 and 4. So at some point, you're welcome to take a look at that. It is in your board packet. It does maintain that goal of a consistent tax rate across school years. So if any board members have any questions, you're welcome to reach out to me. But I just wanted to mention, Randy, that we did put that into the packet as well.
Great,
So thank you.
Does anybody want us to pull that up or have any questions with regards to that? All right. Rebecca, if you can pull up the document that we had. All right. Steve, can you see that?
Yep.
All right. So what Steve, Alley, and I looked at the other day was we were just curious what some other districts were doing in the fall. Whenever a board moves forward and approves their resolutions, they will then appear on a website that DPI maintains. And I just did a PDF of what's already out there right now. I've given the board members a copy of it in paper at their places as well. What you'll see, and just to kind of orientate you to how these things work, on the left-hand side, you have the district that's being identified, the date that the vote will take place. So these are all the November 8th ones that have had resolutions passed so far. The amounts, the brief description, and the language. And I want to kind of focus you on right where the cursor is around type. So when it says NR, that means non-recurring. When it says RR, that would be a recurring. Those are all revenue cap exemption questions. And when it says issue debt, that's a capital project. So that's kind of how those are articulated. And you'll see that there's examples of each of those from districts around the state. I mean, if you just look at the Adams Friendship one, this one is to exceed the revenue cap by 12.6 million over a 4-year period. They start with 1.7, 3.2, 3.7, 4 million, totaling up to 12.6. So it just gives you kind of an idea of kind of how districts of similar or smaller size are really comparing to some of the dollars that we're looking at. You'll see some in there, like I think the Verona one was a recurring referendum in 2023, 19 million all at once. I think then the last one we had here was like a Whitewater, which was 22 million to exceed the caps, 4.4 million each year over 5 years, adding up to 22 million. So it just gives you kind of at least a little bit of a flavor, and every district has their own unique needs that they're trying to address, so they're not completely apples to apples, but it at least gives you a concept of what's being asked for out there. I know there's been some dialogue in the community just around the size of the referendum, the 175 million. We have to remember that's for 2 schools. And then there exceed the cap numbers. You can kind of see how we compare to some other areas, and some of those costs are also associated with new schools coming on board. So just as kind of a point of reference that you can kind of see what's happening around the state, and as more districts approve these, we can keep you updated on kind of what's happening in other regions of the state. Steve, anything to add with regards to this document?
No, but just to share with you, Randy, most boards are making these decisions, tonight, some are, and then also many of them have special meetings in August. And so this list is going to get significantly bigger. I've heard from Quarles and Brady that there may be up to 180 districts looking at questions during the month of August. So you can see this list is maybe 20, 25 districts that have already decided, but it's going to get significantly bigger as we move towards the end of August.
Great. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve. Moving on. So we have a couple things that we need to do on a yearly basis, and just the first item is we need to have a resolution to establish that our district will use the expulsion hearing process. That's one motion, and then we actually have a second motion on who that person will be. Because there are other ways you can do an expulsion hearing. We do it with an expulsion hearing.
Yeah, we use, as Joan said, the district uses an expulsion hearing officer by statute. That's a power given to the board. You can delegate it off to an expulsion hearing officer who then operates those hearings. So the first motion we would need if we want to continue with that process is to approve the resolution that's stated in the written document and board book for us to establish the district expulsion hearing officer. Once you've approved that resolution, then we will actually appoint the person who would be doing that work. And this needs to be a roll call vote.
I move that we approve the resolution to hire expulsion hearing officer.
Second.
And I need to do this by roll call. Dolzer?
Aye.
And Judy?
Yes.
Myself, yes. Ted?
Yes.
Jack, here. Mark?
Aye.
And Brian?
Aye.
Thank you.
All right.
Second, the officer that has been used for the last, I believe, 2 or 3 years has been John Anderson. I think we've been happy with his work. He seems to get things back to us pretty quickly.
Yeah, John's done a great job with representing us in that role. We went out to an RFP a few years ago. John was the leader in who we've appointed the last few years. He's done a great job, and Rebecca's very pleased because she gets to work with him pretty closely with these, turns around our decisions in a very expedient manner. So I'd recommend John Anderson of Hush Blackwell Law Firm to be our expulsion hearing officer for this year.
Motion to approve.
Second?
And you need roll call for this one?
Let's just do it by roll call and make sure we do it right.
Judy?
Yes.
Judy?
Yes.
Joan, yes. Ted?
Yes.
Ted not here. Mark?
Aye.
And Brian?
Aye.
Thank you. Next, we need to appoint a medical advisor for our 22-23 school year, and it looks like Dr. Bill Ranum is willing to do that again.
Yeah, and we've always had a medical advisor. This is something that someone we can go to whenever we have questions. I mean, this is not a COVID-related issue. This is just something related to anything we need kind of assistance on a medical level. We have someone we can go to who has expertise in the area. So our recommendation, and we have cleared this with Dr. Ranum, that he'd be willing to serve in that capacity.
I move we accept.
We appoint Dr. Ryan as our medical advisor.
Second.
So we have Mark and Judy, and again, I need to have a roll call on that. Katie?
Aye.
Judy?
Yes.
Joan, yes. Ted?
Yes.
Mark?
Aye.
And Brian?
Aye.
Thank you. And that is it. We are down to announcements and correspondence.
I don't think I have anything this evening.
So consent agenda, which really has a lot of items in, including all of our handbook approvals. We have an exchange student in there. Anybody need to pull anything or make a motion?
For the sake of the public, I would like to pull the short-term loan that we typically take, just so that there's an explanation to the public why we're doing that.
Okay.
So Steve would be willing to do that. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I would like to make note in the consent agenda there again are a few donations. The Pride Pump donation from Oil Mefford again is $1,000. I want to thank them and appreciate that continued support. And secondly, there's a set of drums and a violin from a Martha Johnson to our music department, and I'd like to thank her for that. So we're going to pull out the short-term borrowing. Any other concerns?
Could we have a discussion about the handbooks at all? Nothing, just a general discussion.
You could do it right now if you wanted. You could wait till the motion and then you could have
Yeah,
a discussion.
maybe make the motion and we could.
Or you can pull them out either way.
I don't think there's anything to pull out specifically.
Okay. Yeah, you can just make the motion for the consent, and before we act on it, we can talk about that.
So I am looking for a motion on the consent agenda other than the short-term borrowing.
So moved?
Second.
And before we vote on that, any discussion, anything you want to bring up? there?
So, just bringing it up, there's so many, so pointing it out in reading and looking at all the handbooks, these are staff handbooks. And they all have their own flavor a little bit. Some are similar to others. But when you really look at it, some of them send a different message, maybe even at the elementary level, and how they deal with disciplinary actions and things like that. I don't know if anyone really looked into it and see that we don't send maybe a consistent message. Is that something we're okay with? I know what we're leaving it up to, and it probably is the history of, these were created by the principals, and they've been handed down, and then what we see are the additions or the modifications, or whatever it is. So that was just my revelation, kind of being new to it. And not that I necessarily have to change anything, but it was interesting that their formats are all a little bit different. And maybe a mixed messaging as well, so.
Sure. Let me comment on that. I think that's a good observation, Ted. One of the things that I know has been discussed, I talked to Amy Johnson just prior to the meeting and brought up some of the discussion that we had prior to the meeting tonight. The conversation that the principals are having is they've really unified themselves on many of their other handbooks. This one has stayed, just as you said, it's kind of been a piece that's kind of been on an annual basis. Each individual principal kind of has their own piece that they put to it. They're similar, but they have a few nuanced differences to it. It is a conversation that they've started this summer. It's obviously not in place for right now, but for the future to be looking at, do they create more of a general handbook that represents each of their buildings more consistent? So I think your feedback is something that they're already discussing. Would you articulate that that's similar to what you're saying? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ted, for bringing that
Good point.
up. Any other comments that you want to make on that list of items we're approving? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. So let's talk about the cash flow borrowing process. Steve, maybe you could give us a little explanation for the public?
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Mark, for bringing that up. Rebecca, would you mind going down to that item for a moment? Okay, thank you. So just for the board members and the public to be aware of, what we're doing with cash flow borrowing is we are planning ahead in case the public were to approve a referendum in November. So school districts can issue a maximum of $10 million in long-term debt per year that has tax advantages for districts. Once you go over $10 million, you're not able to do that. So as an example, if the referendum were to pass in 2022, we would not be able to do this in 2023. But in 2022, we would have the ability to issue a bond right away in December to take advantage of the fact that we can borrow debt at a lower cost for $10 million on an annual basis. But we can't use that strategy if we use it for our cash flow borrowing. So what Mark is pointing out is we're recommending a cash flow borrowing process that would allow us to issue the $10 million in debt in December at the lowest cost possible to our taxpayers. But that would mean that our cash flow borrowing would not be what is called bank qualified. So we would pay slightly higher interest rate costs on the cash flow borrowing. In effect, we're saving the $10 million for a long-term bond issue as opposed to using it for a short-term borrowing that's paid back the following year. So it's just a planning step in anticipation that if a referendum were to be successful, we would want to save that $10 million for a long-term bond issue in December. So as a result, we're recommending a different path with cash flow borrowing this year, which would be a non-bank qualified borrowing, which does result in slightly higher interest costs. So thanks for mentioning that, Mark, that's a different approach than what we were recommending last year because we didn't have any referendums. But for board members who might remember this or remember it in the community, back in 2014, when we had a referendum out in front of the community, we did the exact same thing. We issued our cash flow borrowing as non-bank qualified and saved the $10 million for an immediate bond issue that we did in December after that referendum passed. So this looks a little bit different, but it's all designed to plan ahead and potentially maximize our ability to issue as low cost of debt as we possibly can. So thank you, Mark, for bringing that up.
Thank you, Steve. So with that explanation, we do need to approve that.
Move to approve.
Item.
Second.
Any other concerns or questions for Steve on that? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Thank you. And so we are at any board business.
Okay.
And so, next meeting?
Yep. Steve, do you need a budget meeting?
Yes, Jack does want the budget committee to meet. I think we should maybe wait and have have Rebecca coordinate that with Jack, unless you happen to know dates, Rebecca?
Don't.
Don't.
I don't. All right, we can do that. We'll coordinate with Jack and then get with the rest of the committee. Curriculum committee, Tim, Amy, do you guys have a date or do you need one?
We have a date.
You have a date, all right. Facilities committee, Steve, I think are we ready to get going with some of the dialogue that we need to be moving on?
Yes.
All right. So facilities is Joan, Jack, and Ted?
No.
Yeah. We want to wait to see what Jack's schedule is and we can just coordinate that? Or do you want to set a date?
Steve, do you want these meetings before the September meeting?
Yeah, and I think we could work with everyone's schedule to maybe back them up to each other, Rebecca.
Got it.
All right. Do you want to wait till we see Jack's? All right. Policy, we already have one set. Brian, do you need HR?
What?
Yeah.
Summer's over. Summer's over.
Oh.
So that's Judy, Joan, and Brian. So when would you like to meet Brian?
It just needs to be sufficiently in advance of the September 12th regular board meeting for us to have a couple items to present to the
Yeah.
board for us.
Whenever, do you have a couple dates you want to toss out?
We could look at the week of the 29th, or even, I think, early in the week of the 5th.
Okay.
There's a co-curricular meeting on the 30th. I don't know who's on both committees, but
That's at 7:30
that's
a.m.
7:30 a.m.
That's Brian, Ted, and Katie.
Of course, we don't want to squeeze co-curricular again, maybe, I don't know.
We can
Our
do
hour and a half would be fine for co-curricular, so if we went at 9.
Yep. Do HR
What date?
at 9 on the
30th.
30th.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Does that work?
9 o'clock.
Okay. And I think DEI already has a date set,
Monday the 29th.
so,
And co-curricular set too, yeah.
Yep.
That's right.
is that all we need? I think we're good.
Well, unless you want to schedule those special curriculum meetings. Did you talk to your leadership people?
We will see them in a few weeks.
So,
If we were ready to schedule, then we would have the dates to share with them.
yeah.
Otherwise, we would. bring
Yeah,
it to
well,
them.
why don't we just try to do that quick? I think we're looking at one in November and one in January. I mean, I'm looking at, when I look at the November schedule, either the 28th, 29th, or 30th, that's a Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday.
Mondays are typical meeting days, so I mean, if we stayed on that thought process, we're used to meeting on Monday nights.
So November 28th.
29th or 30th, yeah, so the 28th would be Monday, so does that work for people?
Yeah.
It's right after Thanksgiving?
We've done that.
What's that?
Yes, we've done that slot before.
Yep,
Is that hard on the staff after the break to jump into that kind of meeting?
I didn't think about our feedback on that before. I'm not sure that it is or it isn't.
why don't we set it and you can ask? We have
We can
time to
always make
adjust
an
it.
adjustment.
Yep.
We can.
So November 28th, and then if I look at January, I was looking at the 30th or 31st. That gets us through all the end of, switch over of the semester, gets us into the last week.
And again, the 30th is Monday.
Yeah,
Let's do that.
want to do that? All right.
Sure.
So since those are special meetings, I would need a motion to approve November 28th and January 30th as special board meetings for the purpose of curriculum presentations.
Motion to approve, oh, sorry. Second.
Mark and Katie, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no.
What was the first date?
November
28th.
Okay.
Okay, I think we are ready to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Wonderful. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.